Good evening, everybody, and welcome on into, I believe, episode 19 of all of the episodes, all about Final Fantasy 13 and 13.2 and 13.3. So I have got a great collection of people here with me tonight who actually love all three of those games and can talk all about it. Well, they might not love all three of those games, but that's what we're going to find out. So let's firstly start by introducing everybody that is here with us this evening and talking a little bit about what makes 13 one of their favourite Final Fantasies. So Craig, could you just give a little introduction about yourself and what you like about 13, please?
Sure. My name is Craig. I go by Craig, but I'm Cragan. I'm a video game connoisseur, YouTube streamer, all that type of stuff. Um, the Final Fantasy 13 series is one of my favorites. It's my favorite as a collection of three games. Um, Probably out of most games out there. Um, and yeah, it's up there at one of my top Final Fantasies of all time.
Oof, that's high stakes. And Jupe, could you please also introduce yourself and your love of Final Fantasy 13?
Hello, I am Dupe from Dufort Gaming. I I stream variety of games a lot of time, Final Fantasy stuff. Like I recently played Final Fantasy VIII with a randomizer. And I last year I also played through. Well, last year and this year I played through the Final Fantasy 13 trilogy. So I played it fairly recently. And what I love about Final Fantasy 13 is that it leads to Final Fantasy 13 2, and then Lightning Returns is also kind of nice. So I have a love-hate relationship with the trilogy. As I like all Final Fantasy games, so I still like them as games, but when like listing Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy 13 is unfortunately for me at the very bottom of that list. But then 13.2 is near the top, so go figure. So yeah, mixed feelings.
And one of the reasons that we have him this evening, everybody, he's going to be putting a little bit of spice around every now and then. And finally, we've got Ferrico. Ferrico, introduce yourself a little bit, please, and your dislike of Final Fantasy 13.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? I am Frico. It's all in the name, really. Also a variety streamer, like a lot of people here. And when I say variety, I mean heavy on variety. Try to do a different game every day of the week. So at the moment, we're doing Shadow of Mordor, Saints Row, Neo, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Shredder's Revenge, Enter the Matrix, Super Mario 64 All the Stars, Final Fantasy 14, and Thronebreaker The Witcher Tales. And occasionally some fighting games for drinking, smoking, fighting as well. So lots of variety. I try to make it easy, so if you only want to tune into a particular game, you only need to do it one day a week, etc., etc. That's my kind of aim. Yeah, that's what I do. Irish variety streamer. In terms of the 13s, I'd be quite similar to Dupe. 13, I have no great love or hate for, but 13.2 I rate very highly up amongst the best Final Fantasies, probably only after 7 and 10, so high praise indeed for it. Yeah, then I guess Lightning Returns, the third one, I'm indifferent on. I enjoyed it when I was playing through it, but we'll get into it. There are some certain mechanics and things that really I felt ruined it as a game, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about that later. That's me. That's my kind of general feelings on 13.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Ferrico. And he really does stream a variety with a different game every day of the week. You'll find him there. Okay, so as we've just sort of gone through the first question, my next question is also for everybody, and we'll go with Craig first again. Who is your favorite character and why?
Do I pick out of the first game or all three?
That's up to you, but you might need to explain to the viewers at home if it's from 2 or 3.
Right. Okay. I suppose if I just take the first game in a nutshell, it probably is I don't know if people are gonna like this or not, but probably Snow. No, it's not Snow. It's Vanille. Actually, I like the arc that she goes through. I like it a lot, and like her emotional connection to different characters, Saz and Fang, and the way they bounce off each other. That's kind of where I stand with the characters in the first game mostly.
Very nice. Jupe, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the villain of 13-2 is one of my favorite villains in Final Fantasy altogether. So possibly that would be Caius would be my answer in terms of the whole series. But also I also really like Lightning though, because Lightning is yet another like stoic Final Fantasy protagonist who was purposefully, modeled after Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. But just like how, Cloud and Squall are very different after all, when you look deeper into it, so is Lightning as well. Like they kind of have the same start, but they're very different after all. So yeah, let's go with that.
Very nice. And Ferrico, what about yourself? Who is your favorite character and why?
Oh, well, given the freedom to pick out of the trilogy, it would be without doubt Caius as well. He is just a really strong protagonist, and I'm sure we'll get into some story elements and kind of reasons why later on. But he was something that felt missing in a way from the first 13 game as well, as just being a solid kind of tangible protagonist that you had to fight against, that you knew who and what it was. But Caius is really strong. I'd rate him up amongst the upper echelon of villains as well. The first game, I would just pick Fang, just because Fang. It's enough. Yeah, Fang is just kind of badass from the start when she comes in. Just an awesome character, strongest one out of the main group for me.
Cool.
Can I change my answer?
Yes.
Because I just realized I need to represent and say, of course, it's Mog from 13-2. So,
Of course, you would say Mog. Of course.
yeah. I genuinely like Mog.
Okay. Okay. Well, okay, so chat, just to remind you if you're not aware, as I don't think I mentioned at the start, whenever we do these podcasts, if you look in the channel points, you will see that there is a channel point available for you to ask any of these guys a question about any of the Final Fantasy XIII franchise. So if you have a question that you would like to ask, you can point it at somebody if you'd like, or you can just ask the question and I will point it in somebody's direction. But feel free to just go through the channel point and send them on in, and we will read them out when is applicable. We'll see what the question is about. So my next question is another one that's for everybody, and we'll start with Jupe. So which character do you feel is the least developed, and why?
Well, it's a tough one because it's like 13, especially like if we're talking specifically 13, the first game. It is very like, well, all of them are very very character based. They delve very deep into like the characters themselves, and everybody goes through a story of some sort. So from the main cast, I feel like everybody is sort of equally brought to light. Everybody's got their moment in the limelight. So yeah, I'm just going to take a free pass on this and say nobody.
Oh, well, we like to have different answers. Ferrico, who do you feel is the least developed?
For me, it's clear. It's obviously Snow. Snow starts out an idiot that just charges into situations, and he finishes an idiot that just charges into situations. He is involved in a deep plot, all of which is utterly ludicrous anyway, but he is involved in this deep like plot that goes on for half the game and basically learns nothing out of it and just goes through no character development at all. At least the other character involved does go through some, but that whole thing is just like I don't know. I got through it by just memeing it the last time I played, but yep, Snow starts out an idiot, finishes an idiot, learns nothing.
Okay, thank you. And Craig, what about you? Who's the least developed in your eyes?
I'm actually in agreement with Ferrico. Snow is probably the least developed. I still like the things he goes through, but I don't think he doesn't change too much, as most people say. He doesn't really have a lot of. He doesn't finish in the best way.
Okay, cool. Well, my next question is also actually aimed at Craig. What are your thoughts on the story of the feared Falsey and Lissy? Could you please explain to us what these mean?
Right. Okay. So the Falsi are basically these godlike beings. So they're just powerful entities, but they're being treated like gods. They're created by the god of this world, um, and they're they use their powers to mark humans for their if they need them to do things for them, basically like enthralling people. They give them magic powers and basically use them to like because there's a fight between two different groups of Falsi, so they mark humans to fight for them and things like that happen. The fight that's what was the question? Thoughts on the story?
The yeah, the source of the the thoughts on the story of the feared Falsey and Lissy and what those two things
Yeah,
mean.
yeah. Like my thoughts on how they're used in the kind of lore and everything. I do like the way they're implemented because they all have their own kind of uniqueness to them, and especially when you get to the pulse part of the game, you can see all the different types of Falsi doing their different things to like going towards their end goals. I think they're really interesting. Some of them are really just cool looking, but it's an interesting like when you go through the entire series and you see the ultimate goal, like how they're just pawns themselves at the end of the day. So
Very interesting. And Ferrico, can you give us an overview of the main story of 13, please?
I can indeed. Now, you're going to be thankful. I watched all the cutscenes in 13 and took notes when I was in the airport, and they came to 20 pages.
Wow.
holy crap!
Big pages. I cut that down to 4 small pages, so it's more bite size. It was like 8 hours of cutscenes,
Wow.
so it was a lot. So I was just scribbling, not really paying attention, and I had all these massive notes. Also, thank you to Craig for. I just asked that what the fallacy and Lassie were be explained just before the story overview, so that some of this might make sense. But anyway, here we go. Whistle stop tour of the story. So we start in Cocoon and a purge is happening. A purge is basically a removal of everyone that came into contact with something or someone from Pulse. We meet Lightling, who's a former soldier, and it does kind of dwell on that quite a bit. And we meet Saz as well at a train at the start, and they fight free. And I know my first impressions on seeing this, and I'm sure a lot of people's were as well. This is very Final Fantasy VII, even down to the ex-soldier thing and all that. It seemed to be really going for a similar vibe, but it does kind of go off in a very different direction quite quickly. Sarah found a FLC from Pulse and was turned into Lussie, so thankfully we've already know it there. Sarah is Lightning's sister and Snow's fiance. So we cut the kind of Snow and his group fighting. We meet Hope and Vanille. Hope's mother dies in the fighting. Snow tries to save her but can't. Hope blames Snow. This kicks off that stupid side plot I mentioned that goes on for, I'd say, over half the game. Um, the two parties join up. They fight Anima, who's a Falsi, and afterwards they're all turned to Lassie. They all see a shared vision of Ragnarok, but they're unsure what their focus is, and Sarah then turns into a crystal, having completed her focus, whatever it is, which we assume and we're kind of told is to bring them all together, but we don't ever really know 100% for certain, but it certainly seems like her focus was to bring the group together. Snow remains with Sarah and gets captured. Snow gets an Adalon at this stage, and which are the Shiva sisters. We get some really cool, nice graphics and nice effects. We briefly meet Fang. Meanwhile, the rest of the group, Lightning and Hope, go to Palum Palum. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. Um, Hope is pretty much outright wants to kill Snow at this point. Lightning is kind of annoyed because everyone else is slowing her down. Saz and Vanille break off their own separate ways and go to Nautilus. Which Saz tells us that his son was a cocoon lassie, and Vanille reveals she was a pulse lassie. There's a really dark scene at the end of this where Saz puts his gun to his head and shoots, and it cuts away, and you just assume he's killed himself, but it kind of shows you he hasn't. Kind of a bit after. Um, but in the moment, you think that he's shot himself because he's just fucked off with everything. Yep. Anyway, they get captured as well, and they're taken away. So Snow and Fang reunite with Lightning and Hope. Hope decides not to kill Snow for revenge. Just because Snow is an idiot, but at least he's trying or something to that effect. A lot of fighting happens. They all reunite with Saz and Vanille aboard an airship. So the group's all back together. The Primarch is a human leader who's revealed to be Bartandalus, actually a FFXIII. So the human leader is actually a FFXIII. He seems to want them all to destroy Cocoon and can't do it himself. Yeah, they fight him. They win, kind of, but not really. They escape the pulse. There's a nice open area with lots to do. It's kind of nearly where you're finally out of the tutorial in many ways, and it's like most of the way through the game. You proceed through, you do whatever you're going to do in Pulse, you go to the end, you fight Bartandalus again at the end of a bridge, you go back to Cocoon, which is chaos with lots of fighting happening and monsters from Pulse are being teleported in. You go through Cocoon and you fight Bartandalus again for the third time. And after beating him, he merges with Orphan. Orphan is a FFXIII, and it's kind of the one Bartandalus wants you to take out. He's like the battery of it, so if you take him out, Cocoon will fall. At this point, after beating Bartandalus, the party are all turned to Seat, which are the kind of bad things. But they just change back after a bit of talking, and they defeat Orphan. Vanille and Fang turn into Ragnarok at this stage. They call up the elements from underneath to form this pillar of kind of molten rock as Cocoon has started to fall. That then completes their focus and the whole thing crystallizes, which keeps Cocoon afloat. Everyone else is turned to crystal, but then they wake up like right away nearly, it seems, and their Lassie brands are gone. Saz's son Daj is there too, along with Sarah. So happy endings for everyone except Fang and Vanille. And that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of the whole game. I've left loads out, but it's the only way. I really wanted to try condense everything.
This is a really good overview.
That's good, yeah.
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 So Mango Mesh came into chat right at that point saying, "Hello, never played Final Fantasy XIII. Hopefully not spoiled for you."
One thing that came to mind to kind of as a side note from all of this, like from the FFXIII and Lassie thing and the story overall, like I'm a fan of the story of 13. I like especially like the themes of it and everything. But one thing that came to mind was that I love how there is this concept where so when a Lassie fails to do their focus, they are turned into a Seath, a monster that has to just go around being a monster, a zombie basically. And what really shows how some of these FFXIII have no care for humans is that they figured out a loophole, which was that they would give humans, they would give them either a focus that the human cannot complete or no focus at all. And that way they can just turn humans into Seath instantly. They could just zombify somebody by being just like, hey, you go fetch this thing you can't fetch, and boom. And that I thought that I think that's a great like view of how some of the FFXIII have like no regard for humans at all.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I vaguely remember it all, so it's all coming back to me thanks to you guys breaking apart that storyline. Um, so my next question, I'll start with Crag. It's for each of you. Which part of the storyline do you enjoy the most?
So it's definitely what was mentioned earlier by Frico. There was it's actually the Nautilus part with Fang and or not Fang, Vanille and Saz. It's that moment in particular, like where it builds up to that moment where Saz gets told that Vanille is responsible for his son becoming a Lassie, and then he just kind of you see him break in that moment. That's when he gets his Eidolon as well at the same time. Um, and then there's that whole part where you think he's killed himself. That whole scene just like it fills me with emotions every time I see it.
Yeah, I remember that and getting quite upset at the time, thinking, "Oh my god, he's done it."
Yeah.
Um, Dupe, what
Even just
about?
all,
Oh,
all
sorry.
all the moments before that scene, like building up to when he does that, just
Yeah,
devastating.
yeah. Dupe, what about you? Which part of the storyline do you enjoy the most?
So for me, I don't think there's any like particular scene or part that I could say from a story perspective that I really like in terms of like this moment. But probably just like I would have to pick the ending just as a general because yeah, like I like how the game really explores the themes that it does, which is like the themes of free will and fate and defying fate and all of that. And even though like Ferrico kind of alluded to it, where in the ending some of that stuff just kind of happens without real explanation. We're sort of hand waved some explanations in the sequels for why this all happened, but it still doesn't really make sense. But if you kind of sweep that on the rug, then yeah, it's good to see kind of them all finally come together. And I guess that's also why the ending would be maybe my pick, because they're finally this group that has been just arguing through the whole game. They've just been fighting each other and just complaining and arguing. They finally like come together for a moment and beat the baddies and win the day, and everyone's happy except for two of them, and except for the sequel.
And Ferrico, what about you? What part of the storyline do you enjoy the most?
I'll have to give the meme answer first and say the snow gets punched 4 times throughout the game, and I enjoy all of them equally. 3 times by lightning, once by Fang.
That's brilliant.
They're pretty awesome. But really, it's no particular moment. What Final Fantasy 13 does particularly well is you have like a diverse bunch of characters and not necessarily maybe that diverse in terms of representation and stuff, but certainly a group of characters that are all very, very, very different people. Like you have Lightning, who just kind of wants to do what she's doing and doesn't want to be held up for any way, spending a lot of time with Hope, who's like the most afraid in the kid. You have Saz and Vanille, who just in a group dynamic wouldn't be gravitating towards each other at all, but end up spending a lot of time together. So you have all just this kind of thing where it's just the interactions with characters that you feel you can kind of see they wouldn't normally interact with each other, but they all kind of warm to each other as the game goes on. So I think that's the kind of the standout moment for me.
Very nice. Dupe, are you able to explain the paradigm shift and what it does?
Sure. Yeah. So going into some more about the gameplay itself. So to explain the paradigm shift, we need to kind of take a step back and look at what are the roles in the game. So you have, I think they are just called roles, but it's basically like a semi-job system in the sense that each character can have different roles. So they can be a commando, for example, who is very good at dealing damage. They can be a synergist who is good at buffing people. They can be a medic who's good at healing, these kind of things. So you have these roles that everybody can be. And then when you have 3 people, for example, in your party, and they all have one role, that package becomes a paradigm. So that's called a paradigm. So if you have, for example, 1 commando and 2 ravagers, that's called the relentless assault paradigm, which is used a lot. And paradigm shifting is that you can then change these paradigms in battle, which is the main gameplay loop of this game. Meaning that you can have this situation where you have the commando and 2 ravagers, but then you can, if you're being attacked suddenly by a lot of heavy damage or something, you can switch so that you have 1 character become a sentinel, which is the protector, and 2 become medics, for example, to heal them up. So paradigm shifting is this, where you shift from one paradigm to the other. Specifically, you switch between these paradigm groups. The limitation is that you cannot change a single character outside of these paradigms. So before battle, you have a limited amount of paradigms that you can set up, and you need to set them up, strategizing what you might be going up against. And then you have that set, and in the battle you can switch them between those sets, but you cannot freely change them to whatever. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it in like a nutshell.
I like that Croesus has just written, paradigm shifting is the process of letting your character strike a pose so the enemies can continue to beat on you and possibly kill you. Thank you, Croesus. Crag, is there a particular paradigm shift strategy that most people would go with for the big boss fights, for example?
Well, the big boss fights, I would say no. But in general, like there's the general strategy is to get them staggered. So that's generally what you're trying to do. So you're normally using like your Ravager rolls to try and build up their stagger gauge, and then commando rolls to maintain them. Then you've obviously your buff and debuff in there somewhere sometimes. But for big bosses in particular, like if you're just talking about story bosses, you can probably get away with just a few of those general patterns. Like Duke mentioned, Relentless Assault is the main one. But for like some of the later game, like main bosses and super bosses and things like that, you want to have very specific types of setup. Or there's usually different ways you can approach it, but generally you want very specific setups.
Interesting. Ferrico, how different is the leveling system of the Crystarium to the sphere grid of Final Fantasy X?
Well, much like the 2 games itself, the one in 13 is a lot more linear. It's really, that's the difference. The sphere grid lets you move around a lot in a lot of different directions, and you have a lot of different possibilities. But the Crystarium very much guides you through a straight path. It gives you a nice, fancy visual representation, but you're going on a straight line. You have 1 or 2 options to branch off, which you can do if you want, or you can just keep going straight. But the branch offs are normally only like 2 or 3 little items, and you can go back to them at any time. So it's not a big deal. But that's the main difference. It's just linearity. It's a very linear, straightforward system. You do have some freedom, I guess, in that you can choose which rules to level and not to level. So that's a fairly big difference. Whereas on the spear grid, you're kind of static in one area. It'll be like, I guess you could look at it being in a more straight line spear grid, but you can work out of 6 different locations eventually, less initially.
Okay. I need to remind myself of this leveling system. I see that we're getting quite a few questions in, actually. Some from Fen. Hello, Fen. How you doing? So I might actually start reading them before we move too far away from things such as the story. So let me just check. We've had a few questions already, so let me just quickly go off-piste. And I like this. We got this one while we were in the starting soon scene, from Dupe, actually. If lightning was a soup, which soup would she be? Anyone in chat? If lightning were a soup, which soup would she be? Any of you three got a soup choice if lightning were a soup?
Yeah, I answered in chat. I said nettle soup. Tasty but sharp.
I don't have enough variants of soup to know what
It
soup
might
would be
just sting
suitable.
you.
What's Dupe's answer to this?
I don't have one, but that's why I'm asking. I genuinely need to know this.
Well, we've got some answers for you. Noctis has just said a plain one. Paul has said mine, because Paul really likes lightning. Croesus has said chicken soup. Never enough of the good stuff to make it worth eating, and you have to be sick to want it. Wow. Okay, that's how people feel about lightning. Paul did actually ask as well, if you had the chance to stab any character, not condoning this, people, between the eyes, because they were just so annoying, who would it be?
None of them.
Oh.
I like all these characters.
It's 100% snow for me.
Yeah, I mean, this I guess this is like a who's your least favorite character question, and in that I see the problem is that Snow grows on me in the sequel, so Snow is terrible, yeah, but I feel like Hope takes the cake though.
We have a few hopes in chat.
I feel like that Hope and Snow are probably the weakest in the first game, but they grow in the other games to make them more on that same par as the rest.
I would say Hope redeems himself far more than Snow.
I just feel like Hope doesn't really. Hope's yeah.
Hope's also a kid. Kids are annoying.
Hey, I like kids.
Moving on. We also I'm just going to go through some of these questions while you guys have just asked these questions. So, Noctis asked, should Square Enix go back to turn-based fighting? I say yes. Anybody else got thoughts on that?
Yes. I think like I think I mentioned it during the Final Fantasy X podcast, but I think the Final Fantasy series like peaked there, and to kind of bring it to Final Fantasy XIII specifically, one thing I dislike about Final Fantasy XIII on a meta level is that it is, for some reason, Square Enix went from 10 to 12, doing a completely different kind of a system. Then from 12 to 13, doing a pretty different system as well. But then after 13, they've, I would argue, pretty much iterated on the 13 system. Like I would say 15 and Final Fantasy VII Remake are both iterations. They are both improvements on the 13 system, but it's the same kind of system. And I really don't like the gameplay in 13, so I feel like it's a really bad base to build anything else off of. But yeah, I doubt that they will go into turn-based, but I would like it.
Yeah.
I don't think they should go back to turn-based, personally. I'm
on.
the odd one out here. I think they should continue to try to evolve into the action. Maybe hybridize. I think that would be fine. Hybridize the way they've been trying to do some hybridization with turn-based and action. But I think action is what modern gamers want more than the turn-based. and I think it's good to iterate on that, make it good. Like the FF15 action wasn't that good. 7 remake was really good. So they're getting better.
Okay.
I mean, it is getting better. Well, I mean, Final Fantasy has always been, or for the longest time has been hybrid. Like I wonder what we mean by turn-based here, because for example, Final Fantasy like 7 is not turn-based in the sense that it has the active time battle. Yeah. So, but yeah, I would not be opposed to completely turn-based or then, an ATB kind of system.
I'll give a middle of the road answer then. I think we'll see a bit of both. I think they'll do smaller titles like we've seen with Bravely Default, stuff like that. Perhaps maybe more 2D, cheaper to make titles and have them turn-based. In terms of action, like, it's here. It's going to stay. We're going to see it. They hired the combat director from the Devil May Cry series to work on Final Fantasy 16. They're not going to leave him sitting around doing nothing. Yeah, we're going to have more action-based ones, but I think they'll do some turn-based ones on the side and keep everyone happy.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I think, for example, like Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy, the team that are making those types of games, I think that's, if you're missing things like that, then go to those games nowadays. They're still being made, just not as predominantly by Square. Okay, so I'm gonna miss a couple questions that people have asked, but just so that we can get onto that story and then get back to the questions that I've got set for everybody. Because Fen asked, what do you see as the major themes of the story? Are there any messages from the game that you find powerful? Any messages from the game that you find powerful?
I mean, like I said before, one of the main themes of the game is fate and free will, because at the end of the day, the whole story revolves around the fact that the fal'Cie of Cocoon, they want to bring Cocoon down because they believe that will bring their maker back, but they cannot do it themselves because it's simply not. They simply don't have the means to do it. They are programmed to not do it. It's like a do not cause self-harm, do not harm the humans kind of programming on them. So they are unable to do it themselves. So they have to find this loophole of having a Pulse fal'Cie create these l'Cie and try to create this situation where they will destroy the place because they just want to meet their maker again. And this then creates the opposite situation with the party, l'Cie, where they are given this fate that they just don't want to do. They don't want to destroy Cocoon. And it's everybody trying to kind of fight these chains of fate and determination that's been brought upon them by some higher power, which in within 13 we don't even really get to know what it is. In the sequels we of course do, but yeah, that's like one of the main themes of it, and I really like it. I like it, and I like the way that it's explored through a very character focused story.
Nice. The other question that Fen has asked is, who is your favorite party leader to control? So this can go with all three of you. Bragg, who is your favorite party leader to control?
Well, Fang, without question. She just hits hard. I love using her abilities. So she's always in my party.
Jupe, what about you?
I generally always just use lightning. I'm generally in these kind of games where they don't really give you control over the whole party. I usually just go with whoever's like the main first character. So lightning, but then sometimes. Like it's almost always I'm using lightning, except if I need to use vanille for death, for spamming death on particular enemies.
Sounds like a dupe thing. And Ferrico, what about yourself? Who's your favorite party leader to control?
Yep, also Fang for the reasons Craig listed pretty much. Good help pool as well, because I don't know, it hasn't been mentioned for some silly reason in Final Fantasy 13. If the leader of your party dies, it's a game over.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if everyone else is alive. It's arguably, I don't know. It's a system that doesn't make any sense, but it's there. So you want someone with a good help pool, and you're looking at either Snow or Fang. It's not going to be Fang then. Or sorry, it's not going to be Snow. It's never going to be Snow. It's always going to be Fang. Nothing's ever going to be Snow. He gets dumped out of the party as soon as given the option.
Just a note on the like, if the party leader dies, everyone dies. I'm very used to that from like Shin Megami Tensei and Persona, so like that I never registered for me as a bad thing ever, even though I know a lot of people say that is bad. I can understand why. Just it never registered for me because of that.
For me, one thing that like bothers me about it, especially, is the fact that it feels like a downgrade or a step back from Final Fantasy XII, where you would just switch to the next person in your party, and yeah, it just feels like they went like backwards a step, but then they fixed it again afterwards. So
Okay, well, let's get back to our set questions. My next one is for Dupe. How do the weapons level up in this Final Fantasy, and what's the best to get for the main characters?
yeah, so the weapons are leveled up by basically pumping items into them. You can get these items from just drops, or then you can buy them from shops. Without going too much into the technicalities of it, there's basically two kinds of materials that you can use, two components. There's organic and there's inorganic components. And you use those synthetic inorganic components to create a kind of multiplier for the experience that you can then get from the organic components, and that way you can get a huge boost to your leveling of your weapons. The weapons basically just grow more powerful with more levels, but then they also come in 3 tiers. So your weapon at some point maxes out on level, then you can upgrade its tier, which basically just makes it even more powerful and allows you to level it up more. And then the third one is like the ultimate weapon form of the character's weapons, which is even more powerful then and unlocks more things. And yeah, that's basically how you do it, and that's also probably the grindiest thing in 13 that you can do is level up those weapons, because it takes a lot to get to those third tier weapons for even one character, and then leveling that weapon up and all of that. It takes a long time. But in terms of like what's the best weapon for each character, this is one of those games where there isn't one. Every weapon is, at least on like on paper, every weapon is equal. They're just different. So, for example, there's weapons that might give you a very good physical attack, but a low magic attack, while another weapon could give you a high magic attack, low physical attack. So it depends on what you want to give that character, and it gives you options for how you want to play. Of course, there's going to be optimal plays in how you might want to bring some characters' powers out the best. But yeah, for the most part, it's one where you kind of just you don't get better weapons, you just get different weapons. Same as Final Fantasy VII Remake, for example.
So in talking about the tiers then, do you feel that to finish this game you need to have the tier 3, or can you just easily finish the game without leveling up their weapons that much?
I mean, I think you need to level them up,
But
but
is it
not.
like you have to?
Yeah, but not to like maximum level. If you're just like if you're not leveling your weapons up at all, I'm not sure. Can any of the others say? But I think this. I think the weapons give you that much of a stat boost over your like natural stats that at least like a high level tier 2 weapon is going to be not necessarily required, but preferable.
If you ignored upgrading them at all, you'll like really struggle in some fights, like some of the Eidolon fights and things like that. You'll really struggle, but you don't have to upgrade them to the max for sure.
Yeah, I would say the last time I played through the game, I upgraded Lightning's weapon and nobody else's, and I think I only did it a pulse, and one or two bosses were tough, but I kind of breezed through well enough. So I don't know. I was half in, half out. I'd say you could probably get by the main story without some of the extra things. Maybe definitely not, but the main story, yeah, I feel you can get by without, but you're going to make your own life more difficult.
Cool. Okay. Craig, this game doesn't really have limit breaks, but a full ATB charge, which is a unique character ability unlocked for each at a certain point in the game. How do you feel about this approach to a form of limit break compared with previous titles?
Well, like stepping back, in retrospect, I feel like they probably could have done a limit system in the game properly and still would have worked out fine. But my experience when I initially played the game was these were just abilities, extra abilities. I never really thought of them as limit breaks at the time. They were just extra abilities that were cool. It didn't really have an impact like limit breaks would have in other Final Fantasies to me. So I didn't really think of them that way ever.
Does anybody else have any views on these limit breaks? Because I didn't even realize. I was trying to remember when I was researching for these questions myself, and thought, oh, that was just an ability, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I'd agree. There's never any great benefit to using them. You're just better off shifting around your paradigms more often than not.
Makes sense. Ferrico, in this Final Fantasy, the summons known as the Eidolons can be like Transformers that your character mounts. Please explain a little bit more about this and how it helps the gameplay.
Okay, well, I'll get my controversial opinion out of the way first. These are the worst summons in any Final Fantasy game. I just think they didn't really work, and I could see the Transformer thing that they were going through, but I just thought it was a bit stupid. In terms of gameplay considerations, there's none, zero. They might occasionally cutscene you out of a situation or something, but in terms of actual gameplay, you don't ever really do anything with them. Even in terms of using them, like we said about the abilities, they're not really super useful to summon in and use in fights. I never found you're just better off sticking to your regular paradigms most of the time, so they weren't effective even in fights. I didn't find Dupe Greg, I'd let you feel free to disagree with me on that, but that's kind of my thoughts on the summons. I didn't really rate them at all.
As far as the gameplay is concerned, I completely agree. They're basically useless. They're there for flavor more than anything, if you ask me.
Yeah, there's a couple of strats you can do where you like summon an Eidolon just because it does something to the enemy particularly. Like for example, the adamant toys like drops down when you summon somebody. So it's like that way. It's very niche and very like cheesy strat where you just like summon an Eidolon, don't just dismiss them right away and just go on with your normal attacks.
Very interesting. All right, here's a question for you. Have any of you ever 100%ed the game? If so, what kind of things are needed to 100% it, and does it seem easier to complete than other Final Fantasies?
I have. Has anyone else?
Yeah, I've done all three.
This is one of the few Final Fantasies I have not. and I will not.
Is it the weapons?
Yeah. It's
the
a little bit
weapons.
too grindy.
Yeah, that's the worst part of the 100%ing 13. Trying to you have to upgrade every single get every single weapon and accessory in the game, which requires you to upgrade everything and transform everything into the new items that you can't get in any other way. Things like that. Takes forever.
Yeah, I remember it taking a long time, but yeah, it's gonna be grindy. I think if you were looking at kind of like a self satisfaction, 100% doing all the seed challenges would be that the seed stones.
Mhm.
I think if you were not worried about trophies and just wanted to feel you had done everything in the game, if you could do all the seed stones, you've done plenty enough. But I think for the actual platinum trophy or fully gamer score, whatever, yeah, you need to do a ludicrous amount of grinding, to be honest, just a silly amount.
Yeah, I don't know if it's objectively if it's like more grindy than other 100%s, but like for example 10 also is pretty grindy if you have to like fill out the sphere grid and have everybody go through it all and all of that. But yeah, for me it's just a case of like for Final Fantasy X, for example, I just like the gameplay more, and so I can like suffer through the grindiness. In 13, I just like I don't want to sit in those fights doing that forever.
Process has just written in chat, sort of going back on the summon thing. Hate to play devil's advocate for Final Fantasy 13, but summons are basically useless in almost all Final Fantasy games. They are more just sparkle. It lets your characters. It sparkles, it lets your character to throw in the air. Besides the obvious Knight of the Round, none of them have any benefit you really need. Okay.
Right. But I think in this game, they actually like reduce your DPS. Basically, they make things a lot worse if you use them, generally.
Yeah, but I would agree with Croesus on that, because in a lot of Final Fantasies that is exactly what they do as well, because they're just long animations that do just like one spell. Like instead of summoning Ifrit, you could just cast fire a couple of times for the same effect. It's maybe more economical and so, but like yeah, if we're talking like DPS, then most of the time they're going to drop it down for you.
I'm also thinking Final Fantasy X, where they're pretty useful.
Yeah,
10 and 10, they're good in 10.
Yeah.
Okay, so where am I at? How many super bosses, Crag? How many super bosses are there in this game, and how do you go about fighting them?
Well, technically, there's only one super boss. Technically, I suppose you could count one of the big Adamantus guys, Langi, I think it's called. But yeah, like the very final Seath Stone is technically a super boss. The side missions you can do, which requires. There's a couple of different strategies to it, but it's a very long fight and it's very difficult. And you have to have things set up and grinded well before you can do that fight. And you have to know what's coming and how to react to everything. It's a very reactive fight. I really like that fight actually. But yes, otherwise the other one, Langi, is more like you can cheese your way through that one, but there's ways to do that too. It's not super impressive. It's just a very large health pool that guy has, and insta kill moves.
I was trying to, in the research for this, I was trying to find out how many, how much there was side content wise with big bosses. Because in previous Final Fantasies, I feel like there's been a lot more big extra bosses than this one had.
Well, actually, I would say a lot of the Seath Stones, some of the Seath Stone missions are almost big super bosses in themselves. Some of them are really hard unless you have a strat down and you have the right abilities equipped and your weapons are upgraded enough. Things like that. Sometimes it's just that they're all lumped into the kind of missions section. They mightn't stand out as much as they would in other games.
Dupe, 13 was remembered as being very linear compared to previous series, especially after having the open world feel of 12. Did you feel a closedness to this game whilst playing it in a comparison to other Final Fantasies, and what other parts of the game come across in a similar way?
So I'm a big defender of Final Fantasy 13 in this case. In this case, Final Fantasy 13 did nothing wrong. I would, in addition to 12, I would also bring it back to Ferrico comparing this to Final Fantasy 10 and saying that the when Final Fantasy 10 is the one that's super linear, but yeah, like so this game is not any less or more linear than other Final Fantasy games. It's just presented in a different way. And that is not to say like it's not valid to think that this is linear, because obviously if you get the feeling that it is linear when you don't get the feeling that others are linear, then there's something wrong. But it's no different. It's just that they have kind of shaved off the extra area for you to run around in. So comparing to like Final Fantasy XII, which has these big blobs as areas that you go through. At the end of the day, in 12, you enter an area from one exit, and you go to another exit. It's just a from point A to point B kind of thing there as well. But you just have the choice of going the shortest route, or then you can run around killing some rabbits or whatever. There's no rabbit enemies in 12. Whatever. but yeah, it's kind of the same. And Final Fantasy VII is also another example I like to think of. Well, Final Fantasy VII is extremely linear up until you get to the tiny Broncos. So most of Disc 1 is just like a straight tunnel that you're going through. You don't really have any choice of where to go, what to do. It might seem like that because you have on the world map, for example, you have all this area to go around and end up in random fights, but there isn't actually anything to do other than go to the goal where you're supposed to go. So yeah, in 13 just kind of shaves that off. And so I don't see the argument that it is more linear than anything else. But one reason why it feels that way especially is that the point when Final Fantasy XIII opens up, which Ferrico mentioned earlier, when you go to Pulse and you go to the Arclight Step and like you finally see like, whoa, I can move around instead of just going through this little corridor. It's quite late in the game, and it is after a huge speed bump in the game as well. It is after a point where I know many people have quit the game, where I quit the game as well, where they just can't beat the boss or they just don't feel it. So that might also be one reason why 13 gets so like harshly judged for being linear when it's it's not any more than anything else. But you to add the last point, you did ask about like the other things about the game that very, very much like lock you into place. And there, the one thing that I really do dislike about the game is the fact that it stops you in the Crystarium. It stops you from developing your characters above a certain level based on your progression in the story, which on one hand makes it so that it's always challenging to play, but on the other hand, it takes away that possibility for you if you're just not good at the system that it wants you to play with. You can't like grind your way out of it. You're just stuck with whatever the game gives you. Long answer, but yes, everybody's wrong. Final Fantasy 13 is the best. It is not linear. It is linear, but so is everything else.
Yes, okay, thank you very much for that, Jude. People in chat are very much agreeing with you on the character progression, the Crystarium thing, stopping you at places very annoyingly, and I remember that myself.
So can I jump in briefly on
Yes.
that, H-bomb? I always felt the Crystarium, and I do share people's frustration with it stopping you at a certain point. I always felt it did that though to encourage you to not just develop your one main role, to kind of push you into developing Commando, Ravager, and maybe Medic, and do a bit of Sentinel as well, so that your character had more versatility. Because while it did stop you like pumping your main kind of areas that you want, I don't remember like organically reaching a point where I had everything, all my roles maxed out. So I thought it was encouraging me to kind of diversify my skill set that I had with each character. I feel that's probably the purpose for it, but I don't know what people would make it at. But that was always my thought on it, was to encourage you to diversify what abilities your character was able to do.
That
Very
makes sense.
nice. Yeah. Paul has made an interesting point, and that is something that actually I wanted to have a question of and didn't have a question of because it doesn't exist. Paul is saying, I think, like the card games in 8 and 9, Gold Saucer in 7, or Blitzball in 10, make those games feel less linear because you can wander off and do something else. You don't have a mini game like that in 13. So in all of my previous podcasts, I'm always asking people about, oh, well, tell me about this card game, tell me about this side hunt thing, and what does 13 have? It doesn't have a side card game, does it? Does it have any kind of game? There's no Blitzball style thing, right?
Not to my recollection.
Nothing really,
Yeah.
unless there's something in Nautilus, but I don't think so.
Yeah, there's
No.
there's in like the sequels and DLCs
Yeah.
there is stuff, but in 13 itself, no. And that is a really great point. I mean, 12 didn't have anything either. It also just had like the hunts, and 13 has the same as in the Seath Stone missions. So, but that's just like side missions. That's not like mini games. So yeah, I think Blitzball would improve Final Fantasy 13 so much.
Just exactly the same. You get to play with Waka.
I don't think I personally would find the addition of a mini game to be that impactful for the rest of the game myself. Like all of the previous games that had them, I played through those games to the end without playing any of the mini games first time through. So, 10, I didn't bother doing Blissball. I didn't do Triple Triad the first time through 8.
I'm exactly the same as you.
I played all these games on release too, by the way.
Yeah, I try to ignore those card games, and now that I'm playing them at this age, everyone keeps telling me, "Well, you got to play the card game. Why aren't you playing the side games? Why aren't you playing this?" It's clearly a big thing for some people and just not for others. Okay, well, let's get on to a very touchy question. We'll see how this one goes. It's aimed at Ferrico, but I know we're going to have some more input. Ferrico, are there any negatives to Final Fantasy 13?
There's a good couple. I didn't write them down. We'll list them off and see how we go. I'm going to start with Snow because just that got to be thematically consistent. Just a character that I found aggravating from the start, and he didn't improve, nor for me throughout the sequels. Maybe he just annoyed me enough already. We'll go with that. Linearity, I know Dupe gave a big defense as to why it's not necessarily that linear in other games like Final Fantasy X. Maybe Ara's linear. I will say for Final Fantasy X, I don't disagree. You're probably correct, but it doesn't feel as linear. 13 has a big problem where you're a lot of the game you're in this kind of like tube, and I really mean like a tube, like the Sonic 2 special stages or something, where you're just in this half curved tube and you're running along, and it's like you run a couple of minutes through the tube, do a couple of fights, cutscene, couple more minutes through the tube, cutscene, more fights, more cutscene, on it goes forever and ever and ever. And Pulse is the only kind of time that you get out of the tube. and then you get to the end of Pulse and you're put back in a tube. And it's when I think of Final Fantasy 13, it's the first thing that comes into my head is tube because of linearity. Plot is another one I'm going to touch on just to get into it. Not even the plot itself. They have a big problem with the data log, where they dump a load of information in the data log and don't really explain it to you in the game. And if you don't read it, you're boned. It's not going to tell you what's happening. It doesn't care. You're expected to read all this like background information about what fal'Cie are, who the fal'Cie are, what l'Cie are. You'll barely get it from what's shown to you, but it's all in the data log. I'd criticize Mass Effect similarly for doing that to an extent, but it's a lot of information, a lot of pertinent information is really dumped into the plot. And another problem I had with the plot, and this is to touch on something that we talked about earlier for sure, is that there is this underlying theme of self-determination and fighting against fate and all that. And really big team, obvious in-your-face team that underscores the whole game and you go through it. But in the end, it feels like you just do what you're supposed to do anyway. And I felt that was just kind of, was the underlying message then what was the point? It was really weird. There are just a couple. I'd probably Lightning as a protagonist. I felt she was very bland. That's a personal thing, but to a point where in 13.3 Lightning Returns, they actually make it a plot point that she has no emotion. And I felt that she didn't change that much from one game to the other. So I was just like, that's weird. Anyway, yeah, they would be a scattershot of negatives. I'm probably missing a couple, but there's a couple.
Beautiful. Anybody else got some thoughts and feelings on that?
You?
Craig, do you have any?
Nope, zero. I mean, no, there's plenty of negatives, but I overlook a lot of the negatives. I think the positives outweigh, and I choose to ignore the negatives because they don't bother me that much. A lot of stuff I would agree with you there, Ferrico, are negatives, but a lot of them I would have no problem with. The linearity point, I don't find that a problem with the game. I know most people do. I don't find that a problem at all.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of the other way around for me. That there's actually a lot in the game that I like. Like I really like the music. I like the characters for the most part. Like I like the plot. Like I like a lot of these things that are very kind of very formative of the game and very important to it. But for me, the problem is that there's like the battle system just drags it down so much for me, like so much that it just I just can't like the game because of that. Because it's just like part of it is that I'm just not very good at the gameplay in the game. For sure, but yeah, like I just don't like it. I think it gets a lot better in already in 13.2. Like they fix so many of the problems that I have in 13 with the combat. Even though it's still the same kind of base idea, they fix a lot of the like small problems that really bring it down for me in 13. And yeah, like for me the number one thing is the gameplay, unfortunately. But then there's also some other small things. Like I do dislike how much like the characters just argue in the story. Like it's part of it. It's kind of important to it that they disagree, that the parties like constantly fighting each other. But it just doesn't. It doesn't. At least like from the start of the game, it doesn't feel like, you know, fun in a way to just watch this group just keep fighting each other constantly and be angry at each other and keep whining about everything. because you don't know them from anything else. That's the only kind of context you have. It gets better as you get those like flashbacks to the 13 days before, and as the game progresses and so. But yeah, I would bring that up as another thing beyond the gameplay. Yeah.
I do feel like there is an execution problem, I think, there with regards to the story and how that's all integrated. I do think they didn't execute everything very well. Some of the dialogue is really bad. The arguing parts are not written the best or scened out the best. I agree, that's true. But like I said, I like the ideas behind it personally more than that.
Just to give a bit of balance on that, I think the battling system is actually something I was quite liked and was quite okay with. So I was actually happy enough with the battle system. The music is phenomenal.
Oh yes.
Really, really good. Only improved on in 13.2, and for me personally, takes a bit of a dive then in 13.3. But I think 13.2 is probably the best soundtrack because it's mainly the 13 soundtrack, just with a couple of key additions. 13.3 they remixed a lot of stuff, and it's just not the same. Beautiful looking game still, even now. But when it came out to the practically a mind blowing extent, really, really, really gorgeous game as well. So just it's not all negative. It's not all negative. I'm actually pretty okay with the original 13, but there's a lot wrong with it. There's a lot that could have done better.
Cool. Well, thank you all for answering with your views on that one. For people in chat, just a reminder, if you do have any questions about Final Fantasy 13, 1, 2, or 3 that you would like to ask the audience, these guys here, if you want any questions about those, it's in the channel point, so you can redeem it. So you just type it into the channel point that you redeem, and I'll read it out because we're kind of moving into the 13, 2, and 3 based questions. So my next question is for Dupe, which is what do you know of Final Fantasy 13 being somehow related to Final Fantasy 15, and how are the two going to be linked?
Yeah, so I don't have any notes on this. I thought about making them, but then I thought, why? But basically, so Final Fantasy 13 is part of when they developed Final Fantasy 13, they developed this Nova Fabula Crystallis series of games, or rather like universe, because it's got series within it that are distinct from each other. So they had the 13 trilogy. So Final Fantasy 13, 13.2, and Lightning Returns is the Lightning trilogy. But then concurrently, you also had Final Fantasy Type 0, which is something we aren't really talking about today. But Type 0 is also in the same shared universe as Final Fantasy 13. Type 0 basically explores the same themes as 13, but while 13 explores it from the eyes of very ground level character based, Type 0 takes it from a more strategic view between countries. How does the same themes work out there? They share the same deities and such, so there's connection between them. But then there was supposed to be, I do believe it was supposed to be a third line in addition to this, which was Final Fantasy Versus 13, what was the name of it, as a project title. And Final Fantasy Versus 13 was eventually scrapped in a way. It was then remodeled and given new life as Final Fantasy 15. So Final Fantasy 15 started as a side game to Final Fantasy 13. But then, yeah, like I said, it got kind of remodeled. There are elements that were the same there, that just got changed, but a lot of it just got thrown out and brought in as a new thing. So there's definitely a link, and if you really go about looking in Final Fantasy 15, you might notice that there are like similarities to 13. You can kind of see those artifacts of it being in the same universe as 13. It was never going to be like in the Lightning trilogy of games, but it was going to be like next to it. And my favorite kind of detail relating to that is something where you definitely can see that still in 15. Without going into any detail on who the character in the logo for Final Fantasy 15 is in that like actual lore, the character in the logo, which didn't change from Versus 13, is actually originally the goddess Etro from Final Fantasy 13, or more specifically 13.2. We learn more of them. But yeah, the goddess Etro is actually the character in the 13 logo, or 15 logo, I mean. But then it got changed and it's a different character now. But yeah, it's interesting, the development story behind 15.
It's very interesting. Well, we're now gonna start talking about 13, 2, and 3. Yes. Finally! Please could you explain why these games came into existence and how they follow on from the first game's storyline? Now, I haven't actually pointed this at anybody. Would one of you like to put your hand up and tell me, I think I've got the answer to this question? Oh, look at Jupe getting in. Oh, well. Should we start with Jupe and then we'll see what Ferrico can add into that?
Sure. Well, so in terms of like why they exist is just because of money. They were created, obviously, like. Well, I mean, it sort of has its roots back in when Square had to kind of rethink things in the first place with when Final Fantasy Spirits Within kind of crashed and they had to figure out how to get money, and then they came up with, oh, let's make Final Fantasy X-2, and then they just slapped through a cheap sequel. Not to say that, I mean, I love X-2 as well. Like it's all good, but I mean, a big part of it is money because they can reuse assets to just get a game out cheaper. So that's kind of the like real world business reason why it exists. but yeah, they do complete the storyline as well, of course, and I think were always planned to be made. I think it was from the beginning planned as a trilogy, as all of these games were planned out to be. But yeah, maybe Ferrico can take it from that.
Yeah, I would look at 100% agree with you. First of all, it was money. I came up on the same when I was doing my research. It was, yep, we made all these fancy assets and stuff, and we want to get 2 more games out of them, because we need the cash. And I think 13 sales were deemed to be a little disappointing at the time as well, so they just wanted to churn out the 2, and actually 13.2 sold less, and Lightning Return sold less again. So there was a diminishing return on them, but yeah, it was pretty much they wanted more money. The other bit is how does the story follow on? I don't know. Do we want to get into? I won't do a complete plot rundown again, but at the start of 13.2, pretty much Lightning disappears and nobody remembers her except Sarah. And yeah, you play as Sarah, and then you play as this other guy Noel from the future. And the key thing in 13 is that you're allowed to have any little given monster as a character. Remember, pretty much anything you fight. So you have like literally hundreds of different options to mess around with. It's really cool.
Pokemon.
Kinda, yeah, pretty much. I was gonna thought of them that way. But yeah, Lightning disappears. Sarah ends up being the main character, so Lightning is only in the game very tangentially, along with Noel, and you have your random monster then that makes up your party, and you kind of do things that way. Um, yeah, Lightning isn't in it at all, which I think people were annoyed at the time, but I actually thought Sarah was a much stronger character, personally. Um, that was it, yeah. Snow isn't in the game despite being her fiance slash husband, whatever he is at this stage, because he doesn't remember Lightning but decides he believes Sarah and decides to run off on his own to find Lightning, and that's it, he's gone.
And you're happy. That makes you happy, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Better games, by the way.
um, Paul's written in chat, it wasn't just because of Spirits Within, it was also because of the colossal dumpster fire that was 14 version 1.0. For
That
those
was but that was quite a bit later than. Yeah, I mean that came quite a bit later.
So our next question is for Craig. So this is the first game in the series with 2 different sequels which came about to cover the costs, as we just mentioned, spent on the development of the game. What are your overall thoughts on 13.2 and Lightning Returns? The highs, lows, and why?
Right. My overall thoughts is I think the way I judge this trilogy is that I think each game gets progressively better for me personally. I know 13.2 though is probably the fan favorite out of the 3, but for me Lightning Returns is better. I do like how the cast kind of gets more pinpointed onto certain people and they get more development time. Sarah in particular, like Furiko mentioned, very good character and gets a lot of development and interaction with Noel and all that type of stuff. The exploration in the games becomes a much better. Obviously, they took feedback from the first game and implemented them in the following games. How can we make this better? Not less linear, more exploration.
They went a little bit far with that, maybe.
You know, each to their own there.
Yeah.
I like, and we're speaking, just mentioning Lightning Returns. I love the time management mechanic in that game. I think it's really well implemented, but a lot of people hate it, and it's a turn off for people going into the game as well. I think it's a reason why people don't play that game, if you ask me. One of the negative things I have to say about 13.2 though is like I think the whole timeline business where there's like I don't know, there's like 20 or 30 different timelines that you jump around to. Gets extremely confusing, and I think it detracts from like what's happening, who's doing what, and what do they think, and are they the same person as this person? Do they have the same memory? You get very confused with 13.2's timeline. That kind of brought that game down a little bit for me. And what else? I think the best combat system is Lightning Returns. I love the reactivity to it. I love the strategy, the instant strategy to it. I think that's one of the best combat systems they've ever made on any Final Fantasy, personally.
Okay. Do the other 2 agree on that? How do those 2 feel about that?
No. So the director of, I assume he directed the sequels as well. I know the director of 13 was the director of 10 too, and I feel he was trying to throw that dress beer system slightly better implemented back in her face again. That's it. The combat in 13 is okay. I don't put it as the best of the series, but it's okay. But it really did feel like you're going to get this dress beer system no matter what, and you're going to like it. Certainly on that. The time travel thing in 13 too. Yeah, it could be a bit confusing, but it added so much intricacy and kind of what felt like possibility to the plot, as time travel always does. But it also always gets messy. So I can see that argument. But for me, I felt it added a lot.
Yeah, for me, the combat in 13 again is horrible. 13.2 is much better, but in 13.2 I just like enjoy the rest of the game that much more as well. It's hard to say, but I think I kind of agree with Crag that the Lightning Returns combat is probably the best, just in like a vacuum. The part that I dislike about the 13, Lightning Returns combat is that they sort of dropped all pretense of you having, a group of people fighting, and it's just, you just have the one person there who just does the dress sphere thing, and yeah. But it is nice because it's very customizable. It's reactive, as you said, and it doesn't fall into the pitfalls that it had in 13, obviously, as they reiterated on the system there. But yeah, I really I really like 13.2. I think Lightning Returns is a little bit of a step back in general. But it does kind of tie everything together nicely, a little bit too nicely, I'd say. I myself am a fan of slightly more bittersweet endings, which 13.2 obviously has a very rough ending. But yeah, Lightning Returns then goes a little bit too happy in the end. Everything's fine. So yeah, but yeah.
I would actually say on that note, I think 13.2 is probably the best ending to any Final Fantasy for me.
Any Final Fantasy.
Yep, and just purely in terms of ending.
Wow.
I probably would rate 10 higher personally. It's kind of similar actually, isn't it? 10, except that, well, I guess in 10 you kind of see it coming. You know it's coming. In 13.2, you're also told, like, I guess we haven't said what's happening. I guess I can say what happens at the end of 13.2, where basically during 13.2, as they time travel, Sarah gets this ability to see the future, see what happens. And gets these flashes of what happens next every time they change something in the timeline. So then Sarah sees, this is the new future. And they are told that, if Sarah sees this too many times, she's going to die. But when you're playing the game and you get to that ending, you get that one, like, they say, like, this one more and you're dead. Then you get that one more and you're not dead. So at that point you feel kind of safe, and you got happy music playing and everything, and everything's fine. You've defeated the great villain. Everything's fine. This is you don't know there's going to be a third game, right? So it's all fine. This is a happy ending, and then just boom, Sarah just dies, and yeah, it just kind of comes out of nowhere in that sense, much more than 10. But yeah,
Actually, pretty much as well, just to elaborate further, I think it's the only Final Fantasy game I can think of where the villain wins at the end, like comprehensively wins.
You could argue Final Fantasy VII, but I suppose.
Mm.
Nods all around. Nods all around. Fen did say in chat, going back to the whole the gameplay of Lightning Returns and 2, Depends so much on what kind of player you are. The Pokemon aspect of 13.2 wasn't for me, and I dug the action and time aspect of Lightning Returns, but I know a lot of other fans feel the opposite. So I think we're kind of equally, that's 4 of you that have sort of split yourselves quite equally there as to which ones you prefer, and you've all given some very good reasonings, some very good, well thought through responses.
Just another note on Lightning Returns, though. Like, I think I agree with Fen. Like, the action and time aspect was really core for me, but how that linked in with the whole like exploration and questing system as well, all that together kind of just made it elevated the whole game for me personally.
Very nice. So anyone in chat, if you've got any more questions, feel free to start popping them in the channel point. We're getting to our final few now. My next one is for Ferrico. How is the gameplay different in 13.2?
Yeah, we've kind of touched on it a good bit already, but it's really the so well, first of all, we mentioned that summons are pretty much useless in 13, so they just got rid of them altogether. They're gone. They kept the paradigm system, but with the Pokemon with the monsters, which feels a lot more free because you've kind of these monsters that'll act within a paradigm or nearly be their own paradigm depending on the monster because they have certain types. So you kind of slot them in, and that it really just changed things up and gave you a lot of variety. Like you might use a monster, say, that's strong at attacking, or you might use one. Even in say a role like synergy, you might use one that has haste, or you might use one that has shield. They might be 2 different ones that you might use. And you get better ones later, obviously, that have kind of more of everything. But yeah, it's really it just keeps you changing around. I don't know, was it development or just that they had a bit more time with the engine or something? Combat felt smoother or something versus the first one. So it was the exact same system, but it just felt smoother in a weird way. I imagine that was just a bit more time with the engine or whatever, just optimizing things a bit better. But it all just felt like it ran nicer. In terms of that then you have a lot more. The world is alive. You talk to people and do things like that. In 13, like you never talk to anyone, or certainly it doesn't feel like you do. But in 13.2, you're spending a lot of time talking to people, going around, finding out information, getting items, maybe doing little mini quests, going to time scones, you're bopping around the timeline. So yeah, that was another big difference as well, just in terms of gameplay.
Nice.
Yeah, I think I would like to highlight about the Pokemon system in 13.2. It's something that I actually kind of dislike in the way that the kind of player I am, I don't like the fact that you are sort of forced to kind of waste time or waste developing some of those early monsters that are not going to help you later on. And overall, there's just so many of them that it feels to me like it's just overwhelming amount of choice. And especially when you don't know things, like if you go into the game without like reading a wiki and looking up like what are good monsters, then you just have like so many things to choose from, and every fight you come up to a new monster and it's like, okay, well now I got this new thing. Is this is another medic? Is this a better medic than this other one? Like, well, what do I do? Do I spend 10 hours developing this one monster only to find out that this other one was better? That's one of the spots where it kind of trips over itself with just the having too much choice and variety, I guess.
I feel like that's a problem that other monster collecting games had solved ages ago, but they didn't really try and think about it when they developed it.
Okay, sounds right. So, Dupe, how is the gameplay different in Lightning Returns 13.3?
Yeah, so in terms of like combat gameplay, the difference is that you are only controlling lightning. only one character, is the same as it kind of reiterates on how the 13.2 DLC works, where you control lightning. So it just kind of builds on that, where the idea is that instead of having a group of characters that change, you only have lightning, who changes between clothes. You have a dress change whenever you want to change your abilities, but basically what it does is you change your abilities so that you can have one dress that is really good at, or garb that is really good at doing physical damage, another one that's really good at doing magic damage, and so on. And the kind of magical thing about it that really makes it work really well is the fact that you have an ATB gauge. So you use your ATB to use your abilities. Certain abilities take more ATB than others, and so on and so on. So you have a gauge of actions. How many actions can you do? That gauge replenishes by time, but it also replenishes for the garbs that you're not using. So the way that the gameplay loop kind of changes is that you go in, you smack the enemy with, you throw some fires in there, in your wizard robes, you cast some magics, and then when you're out of ATB, you just switch over to your knight dress and start smacking them with your sword. Because the knight has now had time to get full ATB, while the wizard is now kind of gaining that ATB in the background. So yeah, it's very dynamic, very reactive in that sense, and it's very customizable, as you can change independently. You can change the garb that you're wearing. You can change the weapon you have, the shield you have, and then the abilities that you have equipped for each of these. Schemata, they are called, all together, when you have all of these things together. So you can change them quite a bit, and you can make three completely different ones, three very similar ones, and so on. So yeah, it's very, very fun to play around with. In terms of like out of combat gameplay, then the big thing about 13 or Lightning Returns is that where, compared to like the previous ones, 13 is a game where you just do the main quest. You have a couple of side quests there that are really like fetch quests, go kill this monster type of quests. Very like, side quest is very much on the side. 13.2, it mixes it up quite a bit. You're doing side quests that are actually main quests and so on. But they are quite well balanced. In Lightning Returns, it's all about side quests. I think you can beat the game. No, I think you cannot beat the game, in fact, by just doing the main quests. You have to do some side quests to be able to get enough juice for the time tree to be able to finish the game properly. Otherwise, it's just going to have you reset the game. So yeah, you have to do a lot of side quests, and it's all about side questing. You're on a time limit. You have to save as many souls as you can by doing random errands for them. Go and pick up some stuff for them, or talk to them. Go on a date with them, or whatever they want. You just kind of have to do whatever their final wish is, and you're constantly on a time limit on this. And if you run out of time and you haven't done enough, then you have to reset. But it's not very harsh. You can do everything if you set your mind to it, for sure. But it is the kind of part of the game that certainly turns people off, and a part that I dislike a little bit as well, the fact that you have to constantly kind of keep an eye on the clock.
Is there an ultimate clock, like an actual full-time gameplay?
How do you mean?
Well, sorry if I've misunderstood, but like, is there a total time to play the game within?
Yeah. So there's very good. You go. Yeah, go.
I was going to say, so it's kind of like Majora's Mask. The world will end in 3 days or whatever, except I think it's 5. Except you don't have a handy little ocarina that can reset it when it's ending. It's ending. You can maybe do certain things to extend it a little bit, but no, you are on the clock, and it is going to end, and it doesn't care what you're doing.
All right,
Wow.
things carry over when you reset.
Yeah.
Okay. Mango Mesh has asked in chat, would you say Tales of Arise is similar to Final Fantasy 13?
No, I mean it's anime Japanese or JRPG, but it's like Tales of Arise is very action combat heavy combos and stuff like that. 13 doesn't do that at all.
Okay. Crosis, no, I don't play Zelda. So, okay, on to the next question. The next question is for Crag. Final Fantasy 13-2 actually released DLC content as well as being a sequel in the first place. Did you find the DLC content worthwhile or more trying to entice people in with Gilgamesh and Ultros?
All right, you're gonna love me for this one, but I've never played the DLC of 13.2. I had no interest in it when it came out. I thought it was pointless, and I thought it was money grabbing through and through at the time. So I didn't even bother. I eventually watched cutscenes of it, and even the cutscenes were disappointing to me. Like I liked that there was some like Gilgamesh and Ultros and Omega was in it, and that was interesting, but it was nothing. I wouldn't bother paying for it now, even, to be perfectly honest. That's how I feel about it.
Have either Jupe or Ferrico played the DLC content?
I have.
Yep. I think it's included, especially on like PC. If you buy the game, they're already included there. For 13.2, but for Lightning Returns, the DLC is just more clothes. You can dress up as Cloud and so on. But for 13.2, I think there's like three quite different DLC, to be honest. In 13.2 there's also clothes. You can buy DLC clothes, but but
There's like a lightning story, and there's a Colosseum, and what's the other thing?
Snow story and Saz's story.
Saz.
There's three different story DLC. Saz's DLC is pretty. It's one where you just get to play more mini games. Basically, you get to do some gambling in Serendipity, and while Snow's DLC is then the Colosseum one. So that's more if you really like the gameplay and really want to like fight more bosses. Then that is the way to go. It is very much good for that. If you want to play some tough bosses, they are tough and quite varied. And then Lightning's DLC is it's like a roguelike in the sense that you are in a time loop fighting one battle and you just get better and better at it until you can beat it. And it's also another one that I would recommend, just especially on the merit that it ties into Lightning Returns. Then that's kind of the tie-in story DLC that tells you what has Lightning been doing, and then also kind of pushes it forward to Lightning Returns. And the gameplay is, yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that largely. I think the Lightning DLC is the only one you need. The other two are fluff, really. They're just bit of gambling, bit of fighting, nice to have, but you don't really need them. The Lightning one does a little bit in terms of story, and I think it was one of the very first ones they pushed. Was it the first of them that they pushed out? Because I think it was the fan service one. Because it's a long time ago, but at the time people were upset that Lightning wasn't in the game.
Yeah, I remember that.
So
Mm.
I think that came out like pretty quickly afterwards as a kind of nearly a tie-in and almost a kind of like,
Lightning was hugely popular when
yeah,
after 13 released. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it's a fair argument because 13.2's cover is lightning standing there.
not just that as well. The promotional material was all her fighting Caius.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So people were pissed. Like,
yeah. I have no problem with it. I think like I think it's good that lighting was kind of pushed to the side so we could see. It's the same as like Metal Gear Solid 2, where you're given the opportunity
Oh,
of looking at the like main character from another point of view as you play as somebody else. So in that sense, I kind of like it that we get to see Sarah's story and to bring it kind of to the overall trilogy. Like the whole trilogy is this this like switching between Sarah and Lightning, where the first game is everybody trying to save Sarah, and or Lightning specifically trying to save Sarah, and then the second game is Sarah trying to save Lightning, and then the third game is Lightning trying to save Sarah. So it's the same, it's round.
Nice and easy. Um, we are going back to Ferrico. What would be the biggest negatives to the sequels, specifically the sequels?
okay, so I have very little negative to say about 13.2. It's a game I rate very highly, so I'll probably be mainly focused on Lightning Returns, but look at feel free to jump in and disagree. It's the time system in 13.3 Lightning Returns. It has to be the biggest negative of the whole lot of them. I hate that kind of system. Now, as been hinted at, it's not that harsh, and it's actually, I never actually found it to be a super big issue at all anytime I played through it. But I don't like when the first thing I get when I start off a game is there's your timer. When that runs out, it's over. You better have done what you need to do. I'm just kind of like, no, this is a JRPG. I want to take my time. I want to do stuff. And when you're going through this as well, what kind of adds to the frustration of that process can be that any random or miscellaneous fights you get into, they don't do anything for you. You can only level up by completing quests or side quests in Lightning Returns. Fighting is just like a literal waste of time because your time is ticking down and you're just bopping through it. Like that for me is the number one negative thing of the sequel. Just because I hate that gameplay mechanic. I know it's okay for some people, but I really hate it. The other thing about Lightning Returns that quite upset me was there were a lot of very good scenes that had a lot of gravity in 13 and 13.2, and it kind of felt like it undid a lot of them. And just kind of went, well, look, everyone's back, things are great, everyone's kind of happy out. I felt so in a similar way that some people would say about 10 to a 10. I felt it like almost undermined 13.2 or 13.3 Lightning Returns, almost undermines some of the stuff that happens in 13.1 and 2. Just by pretty much undoing it. Like even Caius flipping turns up when I was like, not Caius. The whole point of 13.2 was that he dies. Anyway, yeah, they make him dead at least. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think what I alluded to before was the like too happy ending of Final Fantasy 13 3 in that I think it's without explaining the whole story here for those who know the way that Yule, all the Yules get like the Yules become the new guardians of the unseen realm, except that then one of them magically gets removed from that whole thing and gets to live a happy life with Noel, and it's like what like That's the most convoluted, weird thing
And also
to
Sarah,
just
who's
to give
kind
a
of
happy ending for everyone. Yeah.
What was that, Ferrico, that you just said? Sorry.
and also Sarah, who's kind of a Yule. She's just randomly left out as well.
Yeah. It's
Okay. Croesus has written, is it just me, as your characters in a lot of Final Fantasy games / media lose progress and character development tends lose progress and character development tends to go out the window in sequels. There's a sentence in there somewhere. Okay, and thank you, Fen, for adding in the questions. We'll get to those in a second because we are really close to the end of our set questions. My next one is for everybody. We'll start with Crag. So, what would you say to convince someone who's never played 13 to pick it up today?
Go into it blind, for sure. What to convince them? The visuals hold up even to this day, even for like what's it, 15-year-old game now these days. The combat system, even though Dupe doesn't like it, I think it can be fun for a lot of people because it's much more fast paced than previous games. The music in the game is probably one of the best soundtracks out of all the Final Fantasies, if you ask me. I just tell people to go into expecting kind of a fugitive type story, where it's different from other Final Fantasies in that case. There's much more of a fugitive aspect to the game, to the story when they're going into character. It's all character based and kind of in a fugitive type style.
Dupe, what about you? What would you say to convince someone? Anything different?
Well, yeah, I would because I know so many people who just like give up on 13 partway through. One thing I would say is that try to suffer through it, because then you get to play 13 too, then you get to play Lightning Returns, but you can't really play those games without playing 13 first, unfortunately. Even though like Square really tried to be like, hey, you can play these, especially like Lightning Returns. They were like, oh, you don't need to play those 2 other games. It would be horrible to go into that one just by itself. Yeah, you got some data logs that you can read, like a couple of sentences of what happened previously, but you got no idea what's going on. So unfortunately, you've got to play the first one. So I guess what I'd say to convince them is, sorry, but you have to play it.
That's not very
good stuff.
That's pretty much what he tells everybody that comes into his stream when he's playing Final Fantasy 13 games. You've got to play it too. Ferrico, what about you? What would you say to convince somebody? Anything extra?
And I agree with Dube's point about having to kind of slog through the first one a little bit. But in terms of myself and even in terms of being around Twitch and watching people play through the first Final Fantasy 13, some people do actually quite take to it and take to the characters and have a fun time going through it. Some people really don't like it and find it slog, and then they're going to play the sequels, which are kind of what they're more interested in based on just general feedback. I think the general opinion is that the sequels are better, but then they're kind of turned off the sequels after playing the first one and never actually go back or get to them. So it's, for the love of God, if you make enough effort to play the first 13, at least play the better games after it. That'll be my main bit of advice. But there's just some really strong scenes. There's one bit in 13.2 where you visit Noel's hometown and this team hits, and it's just, as kind of events unfold and you see what's happening and the team kind of heightens and really chimes in. It's just this heartbreaking moment, but it's done through gameplay. It's not actually done via cutscene, and like it's one of those ones that just stays with you. Caius is also just phenomenal as a antagonist. He's something everyone should experience. Caius, to the stage, there's one bit where he's kind of like, Caius's main aim is to try save Yule, so but he's destroying history to do it. And straight up, Sarah says to him, "You're going to destroy history just so you can save Yule?" And he just goes, "Yes." No qualms about it whatsoever. He's just brilliant as an antagonist. He's just like, yes. Also, he has a voice that is close to divinity.
Yeah, Liam O'Brien.
Liam O'Brien is a legend.
Yeah, sounds like Liam O'Brien, doing a voice of Liam O'Brien.
Grimoire voice.
Yeah. I think one like with Caius, it's the same kind of situation as with Lightning, in my opinion. That I think Caius is kind of presented at the very beginning, or what you might think when you see Caius the first time is like, who is this Sephiroth clone? You know, there's a bit of Sephiroth there, so that might be like the first impression you get, but then you kind of get that this is a completely different kind of person. But yeah, I mean, just to kind of add that I don't like completely hate Final Fantasy 13. It's still a Final Fantasy game, and I still hold it in high regard. It's just something where you might not enjoy the gameplay as much, but I think the story holds up over it. I really wish they had like built-in cheats in there or something. Because I've just I have recently watched like a streamer play through 13 and just giving up. Unfortunately, they just didn't feel it because it was just too much of a slog to stream. So yeah, it's unfortunate.
Oh. My last question I did aim at Duke, but you've kind of answered it already. My question was, what would you suggest people who play 13 to also pick up both sequels?
100%.
I mean, yes, of course, like obviously yes. But I would say that if you have to play the sequels, then yeah, you gotta play both. Obviously, there's like the story just ends otherwise. You don't get the ending if you don't get Lightning Returns. But I would actually argue that like many trilogies through different medium, Final Fantasy 13 is actually a complete game by itself. If you play it, that's all you need. Like it doesn't end on a cliffhanger. It doesn't end, you know, on hey, lightning has suddenly disappeared. That's how 13.2 begins. So like if you play just 13 and you have a good time with it, then I mean you're not losing anything in that sense. But yeah, of course, play them. So much better.
Anyone got anything else to say on that?
Nice, got everything there.
Succinct answer there.
Pretty much it. Just to reiterate again, I put 13.2 among my top couple of Final Fantasies of all of them, so that's where I placed that one.
Very nice. Well, let's go through the audience's questions, shall we? We did have one from Gecko a while back that I'm just thinking we've kind of answered. What can you say, if anything, to convince someone that Final Fantasy 13 is the best in the series? Part 2 and 3 are excluded.
I don't think it's the best in the series, so it'd be hard for me to come up with reasons.
Yeah.
Just lying to them,
Just
basically.
the first game, it's like out of the Final Fantasies, it'd be like 8 or 9 on my list, to be honest, but I don't know.
I think if you were to go with a hard sell, you could say it's the best graphically, possibly even still better than 15, because 15 kind of kept the non-CGI or kept away from going into CGI, so it probably looks pretty in 15 even at times. So you could make a strong argument it's the prettiest of any.
Remake though.
Yeah, well, yeah, remake them. Prettiest of the main numbers.
Right.
Go with that.
I actually got a question from Noctis, which was aimed directly at Ferrico. How would you rate the story, the main game, Final Fantasy XIII story? How would you rate it?
The story is pretty good. I never thought the story was the problem. My only problem with the story is that it's too much in the data log. At times, you are expected to read that thing. It's too much in it. Overall, though, it's got a lot of nuance to it. I'm not super hot on the way it's presented at times, where it's I know I mentioned earlier where it's tube, fight, 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 cutscene, tube, fight, 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 cutscene. It seems like they throw in the scenes occasionally to just break up that. Or even it felt like this thing was originally supposed to be one scene and they literally just split it in two to break up time in the tube. But generally, I think the story is good. I think it's nuanced. In my summary, there's lots of bits I couldn't get into, like the various branches of the military and their kind of tensions with each other and people believing this and people wanted to like. There's a lot of ancillary characters and a lot of stuff going on. It's a deep, fulfilling plot. So I think it's overall good.
And then we've got a question. Well, I've got a couple questions from Fen. Do you prefer playing through Pulse or Cocoon? Anybody?
Kind of like both for different reasons. I think Cocoon more visual sense. I like the different visual areas on Cocoon. But on Pulse, there's a lot of interesting aspects to it, and a lot of lore comes into realization there.
Yeah, I liked playing through Pulse way more because it just felt like I was let off the leash. It was just let out and go. Compared to, as I said, all a Cocoon, it just felt. I keep using the tube analogy, but I just don't have a better one for it. So Pulse just felt like I was let out of the tube and just let to run around and go wild.
So I've never played through it in a way where it's just like I would go through Pulse in like the most direct way, ignoring all the side questing and such. So because of that, I'm not sure if that's got an effect on it, but I actually kind of like Cocoon better because it's more the story just kind of keeps going there. When you get to Pulse, it kind of stops for a long time, and there's a lot of like long periods where you're just trudging through enemies, fighting fights after fights, which, as we've established, I'm not a fan of. Though also, like one thing I haven't mentioned about the fighting in 13, which I feel gets better in 13 too, and certainly Lightning Returns, is that the expected time for you to defeat enemies is absolutely ridiculous. Like some random enemies have a par time that is like minutes for just like a random encounter, and especially if you don't know like the tactic to defeat this enemy really quick, then you just end up being in a random fight for a couple of minutes, which is too long for me. Too long. When it's like, you know, you're going through a corridor in Pulse, just trying to get from point A to point B, but there's a ton of enemies in between and you can't dodge them, and you gotta fight them again and again as you go through the areas again and again.
Okay, next question from Fen. What is your favorite real-world Final Fantasy commercial tie-in or sponsorship? For example, Lightning as a Louis Vuitton model. Did you guys know about these things?
Only kind of new. I've
Yeah.
never actually seen any of it, so
The only one I really know is Pot Noodle from Final Fantasy 15.
noodle.
So when I was doing some research, there were a few things. So when they did release Final Fantasy XIII, they did actually tie in with a bunch of different companies, and one of them was like Louis Vuitton, where they actually did like a photo shoot of Lightning wearing Louis Vuitton clothes. Not quite sure why they went down that route. I know that there's been other, I think maybe Final Fantasy VII or 8, I can't remember which one that did, I think something like a Coke or a Pepsi deal. But I feel that 13 actually did more than they'd maybe ever ventured with before. But it's one that I left out because I couldn't work out what kind of question to do, and Fen has just here created that question.
Sounds like something they did because of the whole almost bankrupt situation.
Very possibly, yes.
Yeah, I've never encountered actually like any Final Fantasy commercials. We don't get a lot of that kind of stuff here, which is I'm thankful of that.
I suspect H-Bomb, the panel, may not be the target of Louis Vuitton advertising.
Oh,
Bunch of
that's what
nerds.
it is. Oh, okay, cool. Okay, now Dupe has actually asked us a question. Dupe has asked himself a question. Who's the best Moogle in the 13 trilogy?
Lightning in a Moogle dress.
Dupe is shaking his head.
Mog. It has to be. He's a weapon as well.
That's kind of cool.
Obviously.
I do like Mog
Yeah.
for that.
Mog is I love Mog. Mog is really like a fun character that, you know, I think if I remember correctly, at first I didn't like Mog because, you know, well, actually at the very beginning, Mog doesn't talk. So you're like, oh, a cute Moogle. But then Mog starts talking and you're like, oh no, annoying Moogle. But then it kind of, you
Grows on
know, grows on you, yeah. And yeah, it's like, it's really sad. I mean, Mog dies at the end as well of 13 too, so, you know, that's also sad. But like, yeah, it's Mog becomes like this emotional center of the group in a way, and then you also get to throw Mog.
Which is fun.
Yeah. And then Lightning shows you how to throw Moogles in Lightning Returns.
Wow. Mango Mesh has asked, are the Final Fantasy 13 characters likable?
That's a very personal taste thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
Everyone
like,
hates Snow. Let's just mention that. Everyone hates Snow.
Yep.
Nobody finds him likable. I understand. I think he's okay. That's all I'd say.
On this, I know some people just found Lightning a bit bland. I thought she was all right personally. A friend of mine mentioned to me that actually she couldn't stand Vanille because her squeaky high pitched voice really annoyed her.
Oh,
So
that
she was
whole
just like,
thing.
I can't deal with Vanille.
That's really disappointing, actually, because I heard that was a whole voice direction thing. She wasn't. It wasn't her performance. They were telling her to do that.
Yeah, I imagine so. Like personally, Vanille didn't annoy me, but apparently she annoys other people. Hope is quite annoying in the first one, but I feel redeems himself in later games. Fang, I think, is instantly likable and stays likable throughout. Saz also likable the whole way throughout. That's it, no? Did we miss anyone? I don't know if there's any
No.
differing opinions there, but that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, I don't think there's any character that's like made to be unlikable on purpose. I think like part of Snow's deal is that that character type is just kind of, especially it depends on your own cultural background, I think, as well. But yeah, I don't think any of the characters are meant to like be unlikable inherently. Like any like side characters even. Is there anyone who's like supposed to be really unlikable? I don't think so.
Really?
Some maybe just a little bit like supposed to be annoying-ish.
I find the characters I think they're written more to be more try and identifiable with different types of people because they all have they all have masks covering up certain parts of themselves. And you see that develop throughout the game and the games themselves. So I think
Yeah.
that's more the way they're written rather than
Yeah.
likability specifically.
The only character I can think of that's supposed to be dislikable on purpose is Dicely / Bertandulus.
Yeah.
Because he's written that you're supposed to dislike him. Snow, I just can't sympathize with Snow. Like even in terms of like he's annoying himself, but like he literally has Hope along with him, who is like so openly, outwardly hatred. Like Hope is like really not at all hiding his dislike for Hope or for Snow, and Snow is just oblivious to it. Like just oblivious to it. Zero emotional intelligence or kind of respect or appreciation for what's going around him. Like it's just that was another, and not just he treats other characters like that as well. He just doesn't care what they're feeling. He just seems to care about I'm going to do this stupid thing and that's it.
So I
That's
read
big...
that I read that myself as Snow just. I think Snow knows that Hope's angry and hateful, but it's just like Snow trying to cope with it by just being like, hey, let's just keep going, okay, in that sense. But for to kind of balance out the Snow hate, as I said, Snow actually has grown on me with the sequels, especially because it's like I feel like one thing about Snow is like one likable part of it is that Snow doesn't have development, Snow doesn't change, because from the get-go in Final Fantasy XIII, Snow's main agenda has been to save Sarah and be with Sarah, and just like this 100% loyalty to Sarah, and that just keeps going on in all the games. It's just all constantly, everything's all about Sarah, and it's just like it's something where I'm like, I might not like the character, but like you gotta respect this like level of commitment that Snow's got.
I have to disagree, Dupe. I have to disagree because what does he do in 13.2? He says, "Oh, lightning might be alive somewhere," and he just fecks off and leaves Sarah. Like he completely abandons her. He's gone. He's off time traveling and doing other stupid stuff. Like, no, I don't agree. It like feeds into my part of why he's an idiot. He's just gone, off doing stupid stuff. He's just gone. He's fighting a giant flan in a forest. That's what he's doing. He's Sarah. Like he doesn't care about Sarah anymore. He wants to fight a giant flan. He's just gone. So I can't appreciate the fact that he's this dedicated to Sarah because it doesn't make sense. Not in the sequels, and in Lightning Returns, then he's just depressed and ruining a city with it.
Yeah, but I mean in 13.2, he's doing it for Sarah though. So he's doing it for Sarah to kind of, because it's Sarah who is like, hey, there's something wrong. We gotta find lightning, and then Snow is like the whole thing is that Snow doesn't believe Sarah on face value that this is happening, but then it's like, well, if Sarah says this is what is going on, then fine, this is what is going on, and that's like, again, the commitment to Sarah is that Snow then just goes on a random adventure trying to find lightning. And yeah, in 13, in Lightning Returns, he's just depressed because Sarah's dead, so
Well, I really enjoyed that giant flan. I don't know. What's that? That cracked me up.
It's definitely a WTF moment.
It is, and I mean literally what is happening when you find it.
And then you get the music as well.
Oh yeah.
Okay, let's move on. So Zessel actually said, "Dupe, is it true that you're secretly a Moogle in disguise?"
No.
Oh wow! Well, we heard it here first. Mango's just said, "I'm not feeling any love for any of the Final Fantasy 13 characters." I mean, they've got some love. They've expressed their love. They just also don't have much love for Snow. And that is
No,
quite clear to us.
Snow always gets talked about way too much, in my opinion. So, Vanille, she deserves all the love. Yes,
Yes, as Croesus said, yes.
Vanille's the best character, in my opinion. So,
Now the
I mean,
interest.
also really like Sarah and Noel in 13 too.
agreed.
Like
Agreed.
yeah, like Noel especially is a character that just kind of comes out of nowhere, comes as a new person, just plops out of out of the sky, and you're just supposed to be like, who's this? But then becomes really likable, really fast. And what I really like about Noel as like a character in as whole, with all the story taken into account, is that you're brought in this character at the beginning who's just like super positive about everything, and it's just like, hey, let's go this way. Lightning told me to save you. Here's Mog. Let's go. Everything's fine. Everything's happy. And like that is literally like moments after Hope, after Noel has been like the last person on Earth, watching like their true love die, and they are like the only person alive, and they're in this terrible world, and then it's just like, yeah, let's go. And yeah, it's an interesting character.
Really interesting as well, actually, because Sarah and Noel have such strong chemistry. I felt that's why nearly they gave Sarah a love interest in Snow, God help her, and Noel a love interest in Yule. Just to make it very clear that, like, because their dynamic was so strong, actually, to make it very clear that it kind of wasn't romantic, that they were both interested in other directions.
I like they did that.
So, I think we've gone through all of our questions from everybody in chat. We've gone through all of the questions that I have pre-written. Is there anything that you three feel that we have not touched on this evening that you would like to add to? Thinking faces.
I mean, I want to just like say again how good the music is, especially 13. Yeah, like and how different they are in a way. Like 13 is more like standard orchestral symphonic music. 13.2 then brings in a lot of weird stuff, but in a good way. Like it's so strange. It's so different from like any Final Fantasy before. Like you start off the adventure, and suddenly you're hearing already like a vocal track singing happy songs about traveling through time, and it's like, whoa, what is this? And yeah, it's a lot of great stuff. Metal chocobo music, all the good stuff, and yeah, I like the like core of it that comes from 13, but also the fact that it just brings in so many new things in 13.2 and in Lightning Returns as well.
Yeah, even in Lightning Returns, the music, it starts bringing in like music from different cultures around the world into different aspects of the music too. So I find that really interesting.
Yeah, just for me, it's some of the really just powerful moments in the game. We just mentioned the embrace and the crystal. I know we mentioned earlier when you visit Noel's hometown and just how powerful that is, and how it kind of does the moment through gameplay. Just one cutscene that I didn't get to mention that just really deserves to be highlighted, because it's full Liam O'Brien being Liam O'Brien, but it's just it's the scene where you're fighting as just Sarah, and you fight Caius, and then afterwards he kind of tells you what his motivation is and explains why he's doing what he's doing, and it's just a phenomenal scene, both in execution and what's happening with the scene. While the scene is going on, he's monologuing, and Sarah is trying to fight him, and he's just swashing her away like she's nothing and just like zipping around the place. It's just really powerful as well because not only do you get the motivation of Caius, but you see how much more powerful he is, how like ridiculously powerful he is compared to you, and it really kind of puts in perspective where you are, and you kind of get the sense that you're alive because he wants you to be, and that is where it kind of goes. But it's just a lot of little scenes like that are just really well executed. They're what make the whole experience worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean that scene and other scenes with Kai's, like Kai's theme is also like phenomenal. That like music is just great because it fits so well. It's like it fits the voice as well, really well. How like it's this very like deep baroque music there, and which sort of clashes a little bit with like if you just see a picture of Caius, that's not exactly instantly what you think of probably. Uh,
Actually, in that scene as well, it almost felt like it was choreographed either to the music or the music was the other way around. It really felt like choreographed along with the music. It was just really, really good.
I'll have to check that out.
there's one thing I want to hear from the others here, and that's your opinion on the very ending of Lightning Returns, specifically the reveal of what the new world is that they end up going to. Do
I
you
found.
think it's? Do you think it's? Was it? Was it cringe? Was it wholesome?
I
What
mean,
kind
I
of
think
feelings?
the first time I played it, my initial reaction was like, "Huh, okay, that's cool." Pretty much.
Oh, hang
So
on. Do you mean, I just want to be sure, do you mean that it's Earth?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was just kind of like, oh, it's Earth. That's what they're doing. Fair enough. I didn't really think too much of it either.
it wasn't impactful.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, there's this thing, and I don't know, is it the Lightning Louis Vuitton thing where Lightning is in like a business suit getting off a train or something? Like, that's the very, very end, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lightning ends up in France.
Wow.
Congratulations, save the world, have a commute.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
thank
for me, it's an interesting ending. It kind of blends the fantastical to the real in a way that I don't know. I've never been too big of a fan of real world fantasy in a way. So
it is like when, like I say, Lightning Returns is like my favorite of the three. It's things like that that do make it still behind games like 14 and 9 for me. So
I mean, I'm a little bit disappointed now. I know that that's how it ends because, yeah, to me, Final Fantasy is a fantasy game. So, why they did that, yeah, it's a little bit worrying that maybe it is just so they could have some sponsorships with some real world things. Um, I think we're done for this evening. I think we've mentioned all we wanted to mention. Thank you very much, guys, for all of your information. Thank you, everybody in chat as well. We're going to go through each one of you to just tell us what you're currently streaming. I know it's going to be hard for Ferrico. What you're currently streaming and when they can find you streaming, as always for Ferrico. Craig, could you please tell us what you're currently, if you are streaming, what you're currently streaming and when?
well, at the moment I'm kind of on a little bit of a break from streaming and stuff, so I'm only streaming the odd random times. I'm playing I'm doing a revisit of Guild Wars 2 at the moment, and I'm playing some Final Fantasy 14 a bit in there as well. But I generally play like a lot of first playthroughs through RPGs, JRPGs and stuff, and Dark Souls types games. And but I'll probably be back to regular schedule stream in like a few weeks to a month. Uh, but you'll find me there at Kragan.
Yep. And Jupe.
Yep. So I play a variety of games, but currently I am playing, as everybody else, I'm playing Cat Game. I was playing it before this stream, and I will be playing it tomorrow. My stream time is like 3.5 hours from no 4.5 hours from right now is when I stream. Usually not on Monday and Friday, but otherwise. Yeah, I'm gonna play through Stray, and once that's done, I am actually thinking we'll start Octopath Traveler for the first time. So I'll be playing that. I will probably not be playing Final Fantasy XIII in a long while. Unfortunately, I think I need to play Final Fantasy XV soon, though.
You should.
I don't think that's
15
bad
is
thing.
good.
Yeah.
15 is actually the one I hate the most, but I still think you should.
And Ferrico, what about yourself?
It's down there with 15, with 13.
By me, I'll probably play 13 next year. So there you have it. It'll be the starter. Probably I'll do one of them each year. So I'll probably play 13 next year. But at the moment, I am streaming. Let's see if I can remember this. Shadow Mordor, Saints Row 1. I forget. Shredder's Revenge. It'll come back to me. Neo. Enter the Matrix. Super Mario 64 getting all the stars. Final Fantasy 14. I'm between A Realm Reborn and Heaven's Word. And Thronebreaker, which is Witcher Tales. So many games as usual. I rotate one each day, complete games on and off all the time. Like H-Bum says, I stream a lot, although less so this week due to being in Amsterdam and other stuff. Just a bit of holiday things to take care of. Yeah, other than that, I play a bit of everything. Final Fantasy, JRPGs, literally everything and anything. I let my viewers pick a lot of games, so sometimes they troll me. Anything can end up in there, good, bad, otherwise. I'll play it all and finish it all. Yep, that's me.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys for being our guests tonight, and thank you, chat, for all of the questions. The next Final Fantasy podcast will be a really in-depth look at all we know about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth so far. So really looking forward to that one. It's going to be quite interesting seeing, because I have to keep up to date as well across the next month. So if anything else gets released or leaked in any way, I have to get hold of it, because we will be deep diving into it. But also at the end of next month, I will be doing a Final Fantasy VII in one sitting stream for charity. So here is my official announcement. It will be Friday, the 26th of August. I will be starting OG Final Fantasy VII. I do not speedrun it. I cannot speedrun it. So it will be a very long stream. You will catch me no matter what time you get there. Playing it all the way through for the charity called WaterAid, which is obviously helping the world all get clean, fresh water. So thank you everybody again for being here. It's lovely getting to talk all things Final Fantasy. I really enjoyed this evening's very intense conversations about all three Final Fantasy XIII games. And thank you everyone else in chat. So let's all say goodbye. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for having us,
Bye.
H-Bum. Bye.